Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I am Tiffany with Voices for Independence, Fitness, and Activities. I am here to bring you wonderful recipes all week long. I am going to be starting a series on eating across America where I choose one state every day and I do a little bit of research and find out what the popular dishes from those states are and maybe a little bit of history why. So being the first day, I just randomly selected a state across the country just because I currently reside on the East Coast. I've traveled and moved a lot over my lifetime, and so I started where my roots kind of started. I lived in the Midwest for a little bit, not particularly the state we're doing today, but I was familiar with it, so that's why I chose it. I am starting with North Dakota, up north in the Midwest part of our country. So what was popular in that state and still is today because of its heritage and its roots is a apple Kuchen. Now, Kuchen is a German word for cake. And today, over 50% of the North Dakotan population either has German or Russian roots. So that's where this recipe comes from. It's very popular there. I grew up in Wisconsin, which is kind of in close proximity to North Dakota, and I know that Kuchen was a very popular brunch item there as well because there was a big German population in Wisconsin as well. But today we're doing North Dakota and we're going to be making the apple cake or apple Kuchen. So I'm going to give you the recipe, and what you're going to need to start with is a half a cup of butter or 1 stick of butter at room temperature. Again, when we're making cakes and desserts, lots of times you want our butter softened. It helps to incorporate a lot more easily into the other ingredients, and it makes for a more smooth batter and a more even bake. So we have our butter sitting out, so it's softened, and to that we are going to add our sugar. And we are adding 1 1/4 cup of sugar to that, and we're going to blend that in. So let me get that started. Pardon me, I take that back. We're only adding 2/3 cup of sugar this morning to this recipe. Doesn't take too much sugar because there are going to be apples on it as well, and that is a natural sweetener. So I'm going to turn on my mixer, so if loud noises bother you, please make sure you turn on your volume at this time, and I am going to just cream my butter and sugar together. So as we start to mix that, next we're going to add our eggs 1 at a time. So it's 2 eggs for the apple Kuchen this morning. Again, it's an apple cake and it has North Dakota roots. So if you have a suggestion in a state that you would like to see represented this week in the cooking demos, please leave me a message in the comments and I will hopefully be able to touch base on that. But let me incorporate the eggs. Again, we're using our mixer. Until smooth and the 3 ingredients are well incorporated. I'm just moving a little faster for the cooking demo, but if you're doing this at home, make sure they are blended really well together. We're also going to add 1 teaspoon of vanilla to our batter, and then we're going to be alternating some wet and dry additional ingredients. This is a typical base to any cake, the sugar and butter and egg blended first, and lots of times people do their dry ingredients separately. So here I have 1 1/2 cups of flour, and to it I'm going to add 1 1/2 teaspoons of our baking powder this morning. And that's our leavening agent, which helps our cake rise. Now this is lots of times it was traditionally served at a brunch, so it doesn't have to be eaten as a dessert. Even though it's a cake, it's not going to rise as high as a traditional cake. It's a little bit denser cake, and it's going to have apples on the top with a glaze that we'll put on after it bakes. So I just mixed in my dry ingredients, and now what I'm going to do is alternate between the flour and a 1/2 cup of sour cream. So I'm going to pour some flour in, our egg, sugar, and butter mixture. And then I'm going to add about 1/4 cup of the sour cream, which is half the sour cream. We'll add that in and we're going to blend it together as well. So I always like to use my mixer in the off position and kind of stir it in first so the dry ingredients don't get thrown all over your cooking preparation area. Now I'm going to mix those in as well. And then we're going to add in the last of the flour and the last of the sour cream and get those blended in. We're going to be scraping the sides of our bowl as well to get the dry ingredients incorporated into the rest of our cake batter. So we'll set that aside. And let me get my spatula out to go around the edge of the cake. And then we're also going to add just a little bit of cinnamon to this. We're going to add 1 teaspoon of cinnamon to the cake. I got to find out where I put my measuring spoon. I set it down somewhere. We'll just grab a fresh one out. We're going to add 1 teaspoon of the cinnamon to the cake. There's also going to be a little bit of a topping put on this, and we're going to have a little bit of more cinnamon incorporated into that as well. But we're going to give this one last go around with the hand mixer, and then we'll proceed with the rest of the Kuchen. All right, this is a little bit thicker of a batter, so it will not rise as much as a traditional cake, but that is how it's supposed to be. So if your cake batter is looking a little bit thicker, that is what you want it to look like for this particular recipe for the apple Kuchen. So what we're going to do next is then we're going to take our 13 by 9 inch pan, and you can either lightly grease it or you can line it with parchment paper, which I have done here. The reason we lined it with parchment paper is because a lot of time with the apple cake, or apple Kuchen as they call it, you're going to want to take it out and serve it on a platter for the presentation purpose of it. So again, I just lined my pan with some parchment paper, and we're going to spoon this in and then spread it out gently. Again, you can just grease your pan if you want, and make sure if you are using parchment paper that you in fact have parchment paper. There's a difference between parchment paper and wax paper in the sense that parchment paper is made a little bit different and is oven safe. Wax paper is not something that can be heated or go in your oven because it will actually, the wax will melt off into your food, and we do not want that. So if you're using the oven, you'll definitely want your parchment paper. All right, so I'm going to carefully spread my apple cake in the bottom of my pan, holding my parchment paper in place until I get it spread out. And then we're going to be placing apple slices on top of this prior to baking. So again, your parchment paper is going to wiggle around a little bit. You can actually, which I didn't do, but probably should have, lightly grease your pan still in the bottom because it'll help the parchment paper hold in place. But we're just going to carefully spread it around. And then what you're going to do next, you're going to want to wash, even though we're peeling them, you're going to wash, peel, and then slice your apples for the top of the cake. And we're putting them on before it bakes, so you want to do that next. So we're going to set aside the cake for a moment, and then you're going to get those apples. I have a handy dandy apple peeler here. I do recommend one. It goes a lot quicker, but if you have your peeling knife, you can go ahead and do that as well. I have had this a very long time and used it in the cooking class in the North office a lot, so I think it's time for me to invest in a new one, but all right. So you'll remove your apple from the peeler, and most of the peel is off. If there's still a little peel that exists on it, it will be fine. It won't hurt the integrity of your cake. Next, we're gonna get our apple slicer, which I just had here. I always set stuff in peculiar places when I'm doing my live. All right, here we go. We have our apple slicer. So we're just gonna put it, slices and cores it at the same time. So, whoops, you wanna set that in the center, and I always like to give it a little slam to get it started. There we go, and it'll go right down through. Slice your apple into sections and core it at the same time. So that is also useful. But if you so desire, you can do this whole process with a knife. All right, once you have your apple pieces, take the core, set it aside. And then each of these apple slices we are gonna slice into 2 or 3 more pieces because we want thin slices to place on top of the apple cake or apple Kuchen. Again, this week, and maybe into the next few, we are doing a series on eating across America where we're making dishes that were popular in each state. And today we're starting with North Dakota and the apple Kuchen. Kuchen is cake in German. A lot of Germans settled in the Midwest and the North Dakota area back in the 19th century, and still today, as I mentioned earlier, over 50% of the population either comes from German or Russian roots. So still today, these recipes are popular. All right, so now that I have my cake spread out, I'll give it one last look over to make sure it's evenly spread in the bottom of the pan. We're gonna lay the apple slices across the cake. Now this is where the bakers like to really put them in a nice pattern if you so desire, because that's part of the presentation too of the apple Kuchen. So I'm just gonna lay mine in rows, which they did in a lot of the photos of the traditional apple Kuchen. You're just gonna go down and lay your apples across your cake. Now, if you wanted to do a spiral design, you can do that as well. You could bake this in a round baking dish also. This is where the creativity and the art of the baking came in with the apple Kuchen. The baker could get creative and do different designs and shapes with their apple cake. All right, so you get the idea. You're gonna go all the way down. And then lastly, what you're going to do before you bake this is you're gonna mix about a 1/4 cup of sugar and a tablespoon of cinnamon together. And then this will be sprinkled on top of your apples, on top of the cake. And this will bake in a 350-degree oven for about 40 minutes. You'll know it's done when you take a knife and insert it in the center and if the knife comes out clean. So I hope you enjoyed the recipe today as we eat our way across America. And we started with North Dakota and the apple Kuchen, which is cake in German. So I will be posting the recipe in the comments below. And if you have any suggestions or a state you'd like to see represented soon, please let me know as well. And I hope you guys enjoy your day. I'll see you soon.